This video is brought to you by Blessed Be God Boutique, maker of Catholic fashionable apparel, handmade accessories, and more.
The modernists are becoming a sort of broken record in our discourse in the church these days. They are extremely focused on this belief that they should have a diaconate for women. The deaconettes, as I sometimes derisively call it, because this is something that is not rooted anywhere in the history of the church, despite their insistence to the otherwise. They want to expand ordination. They believe the church has gotten it wrong since its beginning, that it's some grave injustice that the holy orders are limited as they are and have always been limited. In fact, I would even argue that ordination and holy orders are too expansive, that they're too permissive. Mostly not because of anything wrong with the sacrament. The sacrament is fine. Anything instituted by God is far better than anything I could ever do in life. Rather, it's the implementation we see in the modern day. Not enough care on who can be ordained is taken. Some dioceses are doing better than others in this regard, obviously, but in our time, we see this so much now. Men unfit for the priesthood are being allowed into the priesthood, having a catastrophic consequence and series of consequences for the church, including fewer vocations, and not to mention all the Ted McCarrick evils that many of these men have done. The cure for it is not to expand ordination to include or to conform to a definition of justice as pushed by the world. Instead, it's to just do things the way they used to be done. Actually have moral standards for people, for men who are going to enter seminary and become priests and later bishops and cardinals and even popes. Have moral standards. It's as simple as that. And like most very simple things, it's extremely hard to do. That doesn't stop the modernists, of course. In fact, that does help the modernists make their case. They want women's ordination in the church. And we see another article like this coming from where else but America Magazine, who gives us this headline: "Women are doing the work of deacons all around us. Let's recognize them." So the author begins by quoting a modernist Dominican, Father Radcliffe. He's been a vocal supporter of the Synod on Synodality for quite some time. You will often see him quoted by modernists. He's very gifted at writing kind of, lack of a better way, sentimental sounding, sappy kind of analyses of the faith and things. He's done other things than that too, but you kind of see this sentimentality in his writings here that she quotes. And in addition to all that, though, he's been a big advocate for the so-called renewal of the church that the Synod on Synodality is supposed to be pushing on us. And remember, Vatican II promised a renewal of the church, a new springtime in the church of the new Advent. I mean, they used blasphemous language like new Advent to describe the effect Vatican II was going to have on the church. It was their admission that it was a new church. After all, one of the things that people say is that the church was born on Advent, when classically it was understood to be born either in the upper room or when water and blood flowed from the side of Christ. Take your pick. But it's not usually Advent that people historically said about this until at least the post-conciliar era. Regardless of all that, a new Advent implies a new religion, a new church. And that has not exactly gone over well for the last several decades, and now this new church needs a renewal. See if you can wrap your head around that logic. But here's the quote from Father Radcliffe that has inspired this sort of diatribe about needing to expand ordination. So, from her article where she quotes Father Radcliffe, quote, Renewing the church, then, is like making bread. One gathers edges of the dough into the center and spreads the center into the margins, filling it all with oxygen. One makes the loaf by overthrowing the distinction between edges and center, making God's loaf, whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere, finding us. End quote. Again, that's Father Radcliffe's description of renewal in the church. It's an erasure of distinctions. The edge is gone, the center is gone, the center is spread to the edges, and the edges to the center, all getting a renewal in oxygen. It's very sentimental sounding stuff that's easy to overlook, that what he's talking about is erasing distinctions in the church. There are distinctions in the church, distinctions about all sorts of things, including the ordained and the not ordained. as well as distinctions that conform to nature on how God created human beings. Distinctions matter. And we live in a time where there's a great effort to erase distinctions. And the fact that this is in the church now should be causing some concern for people. Should cause people to fall to their knees and pray for divine intervention. But here we are. So let's actually see what this lady has to say, because she's advocating for the ordination of women. Basically, she never quite comes out and says it that way. What she's asking for are deaconettes. So from the American Magazine article, quote, "If we can reimagine a 21st century diaconate that is prophetic and synodal and that extends out to the margins, that overthrows the distinctions between edges and the center, more of the faithful will be nourished, bringing us all closer to God, breathing new life into our ailing church." Father Radcliffe's bread-making imagery came to mind as I read the recent synthesis report of the 16th General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops, which proposes reassessing the role of the deacon as being not solely in the domain of liturgy, but as one that serves those in need, especially those living in poverty, much like the deacons of the early church. Quote, "Deacons are ordained for the ministry of serving the people of God and the diaconia of the word, in the liturgy, but above all in the exercise of charity." The report also recommends further research and deliberation on women's access to the diaconate, urging that the Synod discuss the reports of past papal commissions and highlighting the importance of women's active contributions in charisms in ministry and pastoral leadership. Lay and religious women are reaching out to people on the margins in service of the church all around us, offering exactly the gifts referred to in the report. Consider the following examples of the pastoral ministry being done by women. End quote. And the first one they give you is some hot button one about politics, hot button stuff going on in Texas right now, and we'll call them the new people. That's what they're talking about. They're focusing on that. That's her first example of people who are essentially helping to violate the actual rules Caesar has placed in my country on coming to and from. That's what they're doing. And they're citing that as an example of why we need deaconettes. And the second example is a little bit more down to earth. We've encountered the person that they use in their second example in pretty much any ordinary form parish. A typical woman who is very, very involved in the feeding of the poor and often stays around to help with catechesis and things. They use this example. And it reminds me of something in life that at least in Catholic life today, we have this desire to canonize every hero of the church. It's kind of an odd thing to do. I have a great love for the writings of G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc. I don't want to see either of them canonized, though. Partially because there's enough out there about them that makes canonizing them kind of a difficult thing to do. That's not to suggest I think that they are languishing in eternal perdition for the things they've done in life. Far from it. I make no such claims. After all, they are heroes of mine. But that doesn't mean that they should be canonized. We shouldn't do that to every single high-profile Catholic who has ever walked the earth and done something great for the church. And so, too, we see this logic now in our parishes. We need to extend ordination and extend honors and honorifics and things to everybody who does a good thing for the church. Well, that's not necessarily the case. But here's her example. Quote, "Another example, Katie McCarthy is a wife, a mom of teens, and a business owner. She dedicates much of her free time volunteering as a sacristan, working as a facilitator of women's retreats and serving in the parish food pantry at a parish in suburban Chicago. She finds joy in helping teens participate in Sunday evening liturgies. Katie creates a welcoming space for young people, and in turn, the teens become active participants in the Mass, preparing the altar, reading, singing, offering petitions, and serving as ushers and Eucharistic sisters." As an aside, what's a Eucharistic sister? I've never heard that term before. This kind of ministry to Catholic youth is critical at a time when young people are at greater risk than ever of falling away from church life. According to a national survey by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate in 2021, nearly one-third of young people aged 18 to 35 said that they expected to attend Mass less often after the events of 2020 than they did before. Perhaps of greater concern to the church, 73% agreed somewhat or strongly that they could be good Catholics without going to Mass every Sunday, and only 39% agreed somewhat or strongly that they could never imagine themselves leaving the Catholic Church. When women infuse their diverse skills, values, and lived experience into the planning and participation of liturgies, it makes for a more engaging, inclusive experience. Ordaining women to the diaconate and giving them the authority to preach at Mass can bring a whole new dimension to sharing the gospel and providing pastoral care, which will strengthen and renew parishes." End quote. Actually, it'll have the opposite. What will happen is the Catholic Church will continue to go down the same road that the Anglican Communion is on, which is headed towards total collapse in the Western world, because they've done all those things, okay, and more, because this is meant to crack the door open to ordination. We all know what's going to happen if you get this deaconate. They restore the ancient deaconesses, as they will sell it to us as. They will create a ceremony for them that in every way looks like ordination but isn't. And then we're going to get stories afterwards of bishops ordaining them. Why? Because that's how we saw it with Fiducia Supplicans. That's how we've seen it with Amoris Laetitia, that there's a ambiguous line drawn, and then that line is crossed, and then nothing happens. And then we'll have women's ordination, and there'll be an outcry about it, and then Francis II or John Paul III or Benedict XVII, people will take these names and become much more modernist than any of them had been, except for Francis, of course, will issue some document saying the public will, the lived faith expression of the faithful have demanded this, and so we ordain here now and expand, yada, 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 and then you will have Catholicism being Anglican Communion 2.0 and emptier pews. That's what you will get when this happens. That's what happened in the Anglican Communion. Be wary of anybody who, by the way, uses terms like lived experience, because that's right out of modernism. That is literally right out of Pascendi Dominici Gregis, the papal encyclical by Pope St. Pius X. He defined and condemned the heresy of modernism, which reduces faith to basically the lived experience, the sentimentality of the individual believer. Doctrine and dogma is determined by the individual believer coming together with other individual believers and sharing their feelings about the faith, and from there, the reality of religion is determined. That is a top-down 10,000-foot view of it. There's a lot more to modernism than that, but that's right out of it. It's called vital eminence or vital immanence. Immanentism is condemned by Pope St. Pius X, and she's just giving it to you right there on a silver platter. Your lived experience in the faith doesn't matter much, except for yourself, because it will dictate how you approach the sacraments and try to live your life. But your lived experience doesn't matter about the truth. It doesn't matter one bit. And here we have it being served up to us as an excuse for how we can have a renewal in the church. The church doesn't need a renewal. The church needs to cast off the dross and the innovations from the post-conciliar period. That's the only renewal the Catholic Church needs, if it needs a renewal at all. It's a restoration of what came before, not new. I'm reminded of St. Vincent of Lerins, who in his work, The Comminatory, the full text of which I have on this channel in 1 and 2 chapter increments and several videos that took a year and a half to do. He was a doctor of the church in the 4th century, and he warned us about people who seek innovation in the faith. Innovation from anywhere in the church should be rejected no matter who is offering the innovation. St. Vincent of Lerins, doctor of the church. Not me saying that. It's a doctor of the church. It's in his book, The Comminatory. If you don't want to listen to my reading of it, go find a copy on Amazon. It's really cheap, still in print. Read it for yourself. You could probably read the whole thing in a couple of days. Very accessible. You'll find almost everything, every woe in the church today, condemned in that book. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Are you surprised that the modernists are pushing for their new ordinations and doing it in the way that is just meant to tug at the heartstrings and invokes politics and all these other things? Are you surprised by that in the slightest? I'm not. It doesn't surprise me one bit. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So to sharing this on social media, that helps too. And if you've ever thought about supporting the work of Return to Tradition, there are links to Patreon and Subscribe Star or that join button below. They really do help keep these messages coming daily. So always pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.